We'll open with a chant. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitam astu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we be protected together. May we be nourished together. May we acquire strength together. May our learning shine forth in our lives. May we not find fault with one another. Om, peace, peace, peace. So after a little break, since I went to Tennessee and North Carolina, we are continuing our study of Swami Vivekananda's Karma Yoga. And we're on the 4th class for beginners. I might just remind ourselves that Swami Vivekananda was in New York City in December, from December of 1895 through February 1896. And this was when he was giving his, this was when his sort of his work for the future started, because Goodwin came on the scene in December of 1895, the stenographer. They put an ad in the newspaper in December 1895, needing a stenographer. He was a court reporter. He took the job. After the first class, he said, I can't take money for this. He took just enough to maintain himself, but not the sort of higher fees that he commanded, because he was a very good stenographer. So here the classes started with, and just listen to the schedule. Fridays was Karma Yoga. In the morning, the advanced class. In the beginning, the beginner's class. Then Saturdays was the same format for Raja Yoga, advanced class in the morning and beginner's class in the evening. Sundays was either a question, Q&A, a question session in the afternoon, or a public lecture. And Mondays was Bhakti Yoga. Interestingly, Bhakti Yoga, he gave 2 classes on Monday, both for beginners. And he continued that until he finished the beginner's classes, and then on January 27, he started the advanced classes for in Bhakti Yoga. Tuesdays and Thursdays were off, generally free. And Wednesdays were the advanced in the morning and beginner's classes in Jnana Yoga. So he covered all 4 yogas in this very fruitful period in New York City. And I'm still wondering, I'm trying to understand how he could give the series of classes as advanced in the morning and beginner in the evening. You would think he would do it the other way around. But maybe the advanced was for those close devotees and disciples who already were getting to know him well, and the mornings, most people were at work. So these were the people who could take off work, and evenings were more free, 7:30 p.m. The evenings were free for people to, we don't know what time it was in the evening. We're guessing, I just guessed, it could have been 6. On this class is 7:30 p.m. What time they were meeting, we're not sure. So this was actually this 4th class, the ideal of Karma Yoga, which was delivered at 10th January, was the last of the Karma Yoga classes. And this, of course, the one in the morning was for the advanced students, but this one was in the evening. It was the very last of the classes. And in some ways, it sums up, both of these classes sum up everything he's been talking about. He weaves together all the ideas that have been covered already in the first 3 beginners classes. The morning class actually goes into more flights of almost ecstatic call for renunciation, whereas the evening class for beginners is a little more sober. And of course, we also don't have the typescript version. We don't have the original unedited version for this class. So we only have the edited version. So you'll notice the language is a little more polished, but otherwise it's Swamiji through and through. Vivekananda's teachings come through and through. And it's interesting to note that the schedule of classes, the first Karma Yoga class was on Friday, December 13. The previous Monday would have been December 10th. There was a class, Various Methods of Yoga. And that's lost. Goodwin must have come just after that. And this period of classes and lectures closed on February 23rd, 1896, with his famous talk in Madison Square Garden in the concert hall on My Master. Only the one of 2 times which he spoke on Sri Ramakrishna in public. So that's also a thrilling lecture, especially when you separate out, because in the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, the 2 talks on Sri Ramakrishna that he gave, one in New York and one in England, have been combined together. And it kind of spoils both of them, because they're both excellent talks in their own right. They're complete expositions, focusing on different aspects of Sri Ramakrishna. And the editors, God bless them, felt that it was wise to combine them and put them into one. And with hindsight, we feel that that was a mistake, but we do have a lot of information about the originals and working on restoring them. There's some work going on to restore them, the New York talk. So let's just remind ourselves, the first class for beginners, karma in its effect on character. As you recall, how our actions actually form our character, because karma refers both to the work itself and to the effect of that work. And there are different kinds of effect, and one of them is how it changes and forms our character. This was the main point in the first class for beginners. And then the second class for beginners, what is duty? And he talked about how duties depend on where we are in life, which country we're born in, which society, which time. Duties are all dependent on that. And he also touched on narrow-mindedness and not judging others through our own lens. And finally, emphasizing, we have certain duties that have come to us in life. What should we do? Do our duty, but unattached. And doing that, we attain perfection. And he gives the story of remember the yogi who gained the power of burning the crow and the crane, and then he ended up going into the village, and he was taught first by a woman and then by a butcher who attained the highest level of spiritual illumination simply by doing his duty. So this is the story of the Vyadha Gita. The third class for beginners, we help ourselves, not the world. And he comes back to this theme again and again, that we cannot in an absolute sense help the world. Relatively, we seemingly can help someone, but who are we really helping? Ourselves. So we should be grateful, humble and grateful when offering service to someone, because it's actually we who benefit the most. So give up that expectation. And he brought in this idea of the dogs. Remember the story of the dog's curly tail? Can we actually make this world a perfect place? We cannot. This world is by its very nature impermanent and very imperfect. And though we feel like we can make it perfect, we cannot. This was the idea one of the main ideas in the 3rd class for beginners. Now we're starting the 4th class for beginners. He's going to, which is also, as I mentioned, the very last class in the series, because the 4th class for beginners was in the evening of January 10th, 1896. In New York City, 228 West 39th Street. I guess they call that the Lower West Side. And it was in a street of a whole bunch of boring-looking brownstone buildings. One on the 2nd floor, they had two rooms, front and back, and they were combined together for the classes. And probably 100. By this time, the last class, probably well over 100 people would have been crammed into those rooms, hanging on to Swamiji's every word. So he starts out. The grandest idea in the religion of Vedanta is that we may reach the same goal by different paths. And these paths I have generalized into 4, namely those of work, love, psychology, and knowledge. So he's going to start out by presenting, in this closing class on Karma Yoga, a reminder of the harmony of yogas, that actually there are 4 paths, but they're not actually separate. Work means Karma Yoga, love means Bhakti Yoga, psychology means Raja Yoga, the science of meditation and working with our own minds, and knowledge means Jnana Yoga. So then he immediately says, but you must at the same time remember that these divisions are not very marked and quite exclusive of each other. Each blends into the other. But according to the type which prevails, we name the divisions. So let's think about it for a moment. If we think of our own life, what is our inclination? We may have we may be particularly devotional, or perhaps we may be more philosophical, or we may love to meditate and be very meditative. Or we may feel like we always have to be active. All right, that determines the primary attitude, but it will be combined, and they all complement and support each other, the yogas. Devotion without knowledge becomes what? It becomes emotionalism, or even worse, fanaticism. My God is the only true God, and everybody else, if you worship any other God, you're going to hell. Right. That's add a little knowledge, add a little understanding that there is one infinite principle manifesting as all the different forms of God, all the different approaches, and you're no longer in fanaticism. Now you've become broad-minded. And yet you can still love intensely, and maybe more intensely, because you know that it's your own particular chosen ideal which is appearing and manifesting as all the different ideals of everybody in the world. So that's how we see that knowledge will sweeten devotion and support and complement devotion. Meditation, similarly. It's so difficult to control our minds. What do we think about? That which we've been doing all day, or that which we really love? We think most easily about that which we really love. Just think, if you fall in love with someone, think back to your high school days. Well, you're thinking about that person all the time, right? Every moment you're thinking about that person. Okay? So if we can fall in love with God, then it's easy to think of God. Then meditation becomes easy, because our mind automatically goes to that which we love. How does Bhakti Yoga here complement Raja Yoga? Similarly with Karma Yoga, how can we work in an unattached way? Well, either we have to be very strong in our philosophy and understand that I am only the witness. It is the gunas which work, it is the body which works, but my true nature is infinite consciousness who simply witnesses this, and hold on to that strongly. Then detachment comes naturally. Or, easier, I love my Lord. I'm doing this for my beloved Lord. I'm doing this for my beloved Divine Mother. And we make everything an offering. So actually, devotion, the path of devotion sweetens karma yoga, and at the same time, as we make offerings of our actions to our chosen ideal, we begin to love more. It becomes an expression of love. So karma yoga and bhakti yoga become really where do you draw the line between bhakti and karma in this case? So similarly, we can go through pair each of the yogas and see how they complement each other. Raja yoga is essential for maintaining balance. In whatever spiritual approach we take, a daily meditation is so helpful and important. And Swami Vivekananda says, not here but elsewhere, his ideal is that all four of the yogas, the greatest person is one in whom all four of these approaches are fully developed. So the one who is a perfect worker and a perfect lover and a perfect meditator and a perfect philosopher. So naturally we will have certain proclivities, certain inclinations to one or another path, but let's not ignore the others. Let's understand that we can deepen our spiritual life and make even quicker progress when we support our primary approach with the other yogas. The only caution, perhaps, the only area which Sri Ramakrishna at least would caution the seeker is those who are particularly devotionally inclined, strongly inclined towards the path of devotion. Not too much of Jnana Yoga, not too much of Advaita Vedanta, which says that I am that infinite reality. Then who is to worship whom? And that may, especially in the beginning phases of devotion. Later, when that devotion is strong, one can easily bring them together. But at the beginning, to be told, actually, you are none other than the divine, and your chosen ideal is not separate from you, and why are you worshiping? That kind of attitude can injure someone's devotion at the beginning. So that's the caution. So he says, right, so going back to his Swami Vivekananda here, each blends into the other, as we have just seen with karma and bhakti yoga. But according to the type which prevails, we name the divisions. It is not that you can find people who have no other faculty than that of work, nor that you can find people who are no more than devoted worshippers only, nor that there are people who have no more than mere knowledge. These divisions are made in accordance with the type or the tendency that prevails in a person. We have found that in the end, all these four paths converge and become one. All religions and all methods of work and worship lead us to one and the same goal. This is Sri Ramakrishna's teaching, Swami Vivekananda's teaching. All paths, all roads lead to Rome, was the old saying. In religion, also all religions even lead to the same goal. All yogas lead to the same goal. They become, the four paths converge and become one. Jato mat, tato pat. As many attitudes, as many moods, approaches, so many paths. They're just different paths to the one infinite divine reality. And what is that goal? Swami Vivekananda reminds us, as he's told us many times, what is the goal?
Find realization.
Find God, God realization. Here he puts it in a universal sense, freedom. I have already tried to point out that goal. It is freedom, as I understand it. It's interesting because he goes back and forth between using the word God, and even remember in the last class he said, there is a God looking after this universe. Who are you to think that you need to help this universe? God is there. So, and yet, in the first class for beginners also, he mentions that the goal of karma yoga is freedom. Karma usually binds us. So perhaps that's why he brings the idea of freedom, particularly for karma yoga, because karma tends to bind us. Our work binds us. We get attached to our work, and then the results of work, as we do it in an attached way, that binds us. Our our attachment for our work increases. Attachment is nothing other than bondage. And then we have the unseen results of karma, what we think of as the fruits of karma that manifest in the future as either pleasure or pain. This is also a bondage. That's what keeps us coming back again and again in the circle of reincarnation, according to the idea of Vedanta. So what is the goal of karma yoga? Which is the goal of all yogas. But in karma yoga, he specifically styles it as freedom. And then he paints a beautiful picture of how everything actually is striving for freedom. We are all striving for freedom, knowingly or unknowingly. Everything that we perceive around us, he says, is struggling towards freedom, from the atom to the man, from the insentient, lifeless particle of matter to the highest existence on earth, the human soul. He's going to give some examples. The whole universe is in fact the result of this struggle for freedom. In all combinations, every particle is trying to go on its own way, to fly from the other particles, but the others are holding it in check. I'm not sure how we should consult a physicist, how much this is, because we have the different forces holding the particles of matter, which in Swami Vivekananda's time, perhaps the atom was considered the fundamental block. Now we know that the particles are much smaller, and there are strong forces and weak forces, and of course we have the electrical forces, and it should be something that one of our scientists, like students like you can research a little, this idea of the particles of matter, the fundamental building blocks. Are they drawn towards each other or repelled from each other? Are they trying to get free from each other? He suggests that every particle is trying to go on its own way, to fly from the other particles, but the others are holding it in check. Our Earth is trying to fly away from the sun, and the moon from the earth. That's an interesting point. If there were no gravitational force, the earth, if the sun were not there, the earth would just carry on through the universe until it got caught by some other star, right? And go around it. So it's the gravitational pull of the sun which keeps the earth in orbit. Similarly with the moon, it is the gravitational force of the earth and the moon, of course, together, which keeps the earth and moon in a cycle of orbit. And actually, we think of the moon as orbiting the earth, but actually, they kind of orbit each other. The moon is much, much smaller, so it's almost fully orbiting the earth, but the earth is also moving just a little bit in that dance, because, so it's interesting to think of. Everything has a tendency to infinite dispersion. This is the law of, what's it called? Entropy. But everything is going to infinite dispersion. All that we see in the universe has for its basis this one struggle towards freedom. And now he gives an interesting example, which we can understand from our human standpoint. It is under the impulse of this tendency that the saint prays and the robber robs. When the line of action taken is not a proper one, we call it evil. And when the manifestation of it is proper and high, we call it good. But the impulse is the same, the struggle towards freedom. And now he'll explain how that works. Why is it, how is it that a robber is also struggling towards freedom? Well, he's struggling to free himself of that intense desire for money or for jewels or whatever he's robbing, he or she. The saint is oppressed with the knowledge of his or her condition of bondage and wants to get rid of it. So he or she worships God. The thief is oppressed with the idea that he does not possess certain things, and he tries to get rid of that want, to obtain freedom from it, so he steals. Freedom is the one goal of all nature, sentient or insentient. And consciously or unconsciously, everything is struggling towards that goal. Very interesting. If we think about our own lives and why we do certain things, see if we can see that struggle for freedom, that desire for freedom. What is it that we are trying to get free of? Because the highest struggle, of course, is the freedom from the bondage of thinking that we are mere bodies, and the struggle to attain the absolute freedom of infinite consciousness and bliss. And simply stealing is trying to get free of a compelling desire for wealth and an inability to get it by honest means. Why do we eat? We want to be, usually, we want to be free of that gnawing feeling of hunger that's driving us. Or some people eat for other reasons, to forget something. It was an old joke Swami Vivekananda used to say. Two soldiers in the Foreign Legion, one of them asked the other, "Why did you join?" "To forget." "And what did you want to forget?" "I forgot." So that was Swami Vivekananda, the old English Swami, who had joined the Foreign Legion, as it were. He had joined the English army. He was an old English Swami in Trabuco. He had joined the. This is a little digression. He came from a very poor family. His family, they were all miners in the coal mines of England. And as I recall, he was telling me on his 16th birthday, he had a holiday from school. And the next day, he went to work in the coal mines. So it's brutal work, going down into these pits and tunnels and all of that. And so on his 18th birthday, he joined the army to get out of the mines. And he joined the medical corps. So he became a medic in the army, and he was sent to Hong Kong, of all places. And so he was a medic in the British Army of Hong Kong right before World War II. And then the Japanese invaded, and certain point, they captured all the medics, and they lined them up on a wall, and one of the Japanese soldiers drew out a sword and was going to go down the line, cutting off all their heads, decapitating all of them. And then a sergeant of the Japanese army said, "Oh wait, no, these are medics, don't kill them." So then they were put in a prison camp instead. And can you imagine what work the prisoners did in that camp? Mining coal. Mining coal. So it actually sort of relevant to a class on karma yoga, because somehow for Swami Vivekananda, poor Swami Vivekananda, coal mining was in his karma. He tried to escape coal mining, and it came back and caught him again in Asia in the Second World War. He was, but it was horrible. Most of the prisoners died in the camp, and they were able to save their lives by cultivating a yeast. And so the water that was drained off of the rice, the meager rations of rice they were given, they cooked that rice, and then they cultivated a yeast culture in which they propagated in that water, and they would drink that, and that gave them B vitamins. And that's what probably saved their lives, those few men who were... anyhow, he had a blessed life in the monastery after that, and a blessed departure also. I was present at his final days. And so we are going back to the struggle for freedom, that everything is a struggle for freedom. And in Swami Vivekananda's case, he was struggling to get free of the coal mines. And it didn't actually, and of course it came from the joke of why'd you join the Foreign Legion? We like to think that he did attain spiritual freedom ultimately by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna. So freedom is the one goal of all nature, sentient or insentient, and consciously or unconsciously, everything is struggling towards that goal. The freedom which the saint seeks is very different from that which the robber seeks. The freedom loved by the saints lead him to the enjoyment of infinite, unspeakable bliss, while that on which the robber has set his heart only forges other bonds for his soul. Nice point. The freedom which the saint seeks, the freedom which we Vedanta students seek, is the highest freedom, the infinite bliss of Satchidananda, the infinite bliss of our own true nature, if only we knew it. And most seeking of freedom ties more bonds, ties us in tighter bondage. There is to be found in every religion the manifestation of this struggle towards freedom. And then he points out that he avers that this is the groundwork of all morality, of unselfishness. The struggle for freedom is the groundwork of unselfishness. Why? Because unselfishness, he says, so unselfishness means getting rid of the idea that people are the same as their little bodies. Selfishness, if we think about it, it's mostly connected with our body and with our personality. Selfish means, perfect example is people who want to eat more. No, there was a we noticed that someone, if we notice that there's a certain amount of food to go around, right? Maybe there's one dish of whatever it is in a family. And one of the kids takes a greater portion. Maybe there's 6 people in the family, but one of the kids takes a third of the bowl. Then we think, that's selfish. And the mother will scold him, hey, that's selfishness. Share equally. Everybody should get an equal portion. Selfishness, mostly it comes to the body. So unselfishness is struggling for freedom from that body consciousness, that feeling that this is me, this big mistake that we always make. So the struggle towards freedom is the groundwork of all morality, of unselfishness, which means getting rid of the idea that people are the same as their little bodies. When we see a person doing good work, helping others, it means that he or she cannot be confined within the limited circle of me and mine. That's the idea of, as we've been discussing, unselfishness. Getting beyond the idea of me and mine, this little circle. There is no limit to this getting out of selfishness. How about that? No limit to getting out of selfishness. Selfishness is such a deep-rooted thing in us that there's no limit to getting out of it. All the great systems of ethics preach absolute unselfishness as the goal. Supposing this absolute unselfishness is reached by a person, what becomes of this person? Swamiji asks. Suppose we can reach this absolute unselfishness. He is no more the little Mr. So-and-so, or she is no more the Ms. So-and-so. He or she has acquired infinite expansion. The little personality which he or she had before is now lost forever. And he or she has become infinite, and the attainment of this infinite expansion is indeed the goal of all religions and of all moral and philosophical teachings. Infinite expansion. Swamiji's, one of his famous sayings, no? Expansion is life, contraction is death. Infinite expansion. That is our goal. Our little by little, through the practice of unselfishness. Karma yoga is, in a sense, the practice of unselfishness more than the other yogas. It is in karma yoga that we can really practice unselfishness. Working for others with no expectation of any results. That's called unselfishness. Putting others before. the personalist, I guess he means someone who thinks of himself or herself as a person and God as a person. The personalist, when he hears this idea philosophically put, gets frightened. Swamiji would come back to this often, because obviously when we attain this kind of infinite expansion, our quote-unquote personality, that with which we currently identify, that which we currently take to be me, which is primarily a body along with a mind and a personality, which a bundle of likes and dislikes, a bundle of tendencies. One person likes action movies, another person likes romantic movies. One person likes hot chilies, another person prefers bland food. One person likes ice cream, and chocolate ice cream, another person, no, vanilla. And all these likes and dislikes, all these tendencies, this forms our personality for the most part. And if we say this infinite expansion, attaining infinite bliss, but what about me? What about my individuality? And Swami Vivekananda would poke fun at people when they would express this fear. But it's noted in the scriptures also. It's when the drop of water falling from the cloud is approaching the ocean, it becomes afraid. What will become of me if I become merged in the ocean? And then it falls in the ocean, and it becomes the ocean, and it realizes it was always the ocean, and it attains infinity. And so Swami Vivekananda would say, why? You are not individuals yet. It is when you realize your true nature as the infinite that you attain your true individuality. That is the true individuality, to know our infinity, our infinitude. So, he just mentions it almost in passing. The personalist, when he or she hears this idea philosophically put, gets frightened. At the same time, if this personalist preaches morality, he, after all, teaches the very same idea, him or herself. This idea, because why? Because morality is unselfishness, is putting others first, which leads, as a matter of course, to this infinite expansion and this loss of our little puny so-called personality to attain our true individuality in the infinite. He puts no limit. The personalist who is preaching morality, this personalist puts no limit to the unselfishness of a human being. Suppose a person becomes perfectly unselfish under the personalistic system. How are we to distinguish this person from the perfected ones in other systems? He or she has become one with the universe, and to become that is the goal of all. Only the poor personalist has not the courage to follow out his or her own reasoning to its right conclusion. It's almost a little aside, this addressing the fear of losing our individuality. And he's arguing here that even if you are a dualist, even if you feel that you're separate from God and that you worship God, if you preach morality, if you preach unselfishness, this is the ultimate goal of unselfishness. You don't put any limit to unselfishness. If you become perfectly unselfish, even as a dualist, you will have attained this same state of infinite expansion. Perfectly unselfish means you no longer think of your own separate self at all. And so you've attained unity. Become one with the universe, and that is the goal of all. Only the poor personalist, he's poking fun a little, has not the courage to follow out his own reasoning to its right conclusion. So now he's going to give this nice definition, one of his nice definitions of karma yoga. Karma yoga is the attaining through unselfish work of that freedom which is the goal of all human nature. Karma yoga one of his succinct definitions of karma yoga. Karma yoga is the attaining through unselfish work of that freedom which is the goal of all human nature. As we've been talking about, really, karma yoga is where we practice unselfishness. Every selfish action, he reminds us, every selfish action therefore retards our reaching the goal. And every unselfish action takes us towards the goal. It's wonderful. If we can put this, file this somewhere in our mental filing cabinet. And when we are, tempted to, who knows how we're tempted to do a selfish thing, We know sometimes we get tempted. Maybe we're working on our income taxes and, we feel like cheating a little bit, papering over the thing a little bit, or maybe whatever it may be. That there's one piece of chocolate left on the plate, and we've already had a piece, and no one said, "Let me take it." Then Swamiji says, every selfish action retards our reaching the goal, and every unselfish action takes us towards the goal. So, great reason to be unselfish. It's kind of a paradox, isn't it? Because by being unselfish, it takes us quicker to our goal, which is perfect freedom, perfect joy. And you could say, that's then also a desire for yourself to attain that perfect peace and joy. Only we would then turn to Sri Ramakrishna, who would say the desire for devotion, the desire for God is not to be considered as a desire as other desires are. Other desires bind us. Selfish desires bind us. But it's ultimately an unselfish desire because it's when we attain it, we realize that our little self was only a figment of our imagination, and our true self is the selfhood of all beings. So actually, the desire for perfect freedom is not a desire which binds us, rather it's a desire which frees us. That is why the only definition, he says, the only definition that can be given of morality is this: that which is selfish is immoral, and that which is unselfish is moral. Sometimes we will place it a little bit differently, this as in that which takes us towards God, that which takes us Godward is moral or good, that which takes us away from God, which contracts us, is immoral or bad or mistaken. But if you come to details, the matter will not be seen to be quite so simple. It seems very straightforward. That which is selfish is immoral, and that which is unselfish is moral. But then, how do you really determine, is an action selfish or unselfish? So he's going to point this out. For instance, environment often makes the details different, as I have already mentioned. The same action under one set of circumstances may be unselfish, and under another set, quite selfish. So we can give only a general definition and leave the details to be worked out by taking into consideration the differences in time, place, and circumstances. In one country, one kind of conduct is considered moral, and in another, the very same is immoral, because the circumstances differ. So Swamiji has given us some definitions. And we can also think about that kind of the way customs differ and even our position in life. If we are, say, a spiritual seeker dedicated to yoga and to leading a very sattvic life, perhaps we take a vow of ahimsa. That means not injuring any being by thought, word, or deed. Then it would be very wrong for us even to injure any animal, let alone another human being. But say someone else is a soldier and feels that his dharma or her dharma is to be a soldier and defend the country. Then it may very well be her duty to shoot someone, to shoot an invader. And that would be considered a moral action. So it's an unselfish action because it's for the good of the country, to saving the country from invaders, say, for instance. This is how we can see that the similar action can be understood very differently as a moral action or an immoral action, as a selfish action or an unselfish action, depending on the circumstances. The goal of all nature is freedom, and freedom is to be attained only by perfect unselfishness. Here he says, only. Perfect freedom is to be attained only by perfect unselfishness. Whether that unselfishness comes through meditation, or through philosophical discernment, or through love of God, or through work. Interesting. He says that freedom is to be attained through unselfishness, perfect unselfishness. Every thought, word, or deed that is unselfish takes us towards the goal, and as such is called moral. You're just restating the idea again. That definition, you will find, holds good in every religion and every system of ethics. In some systems of thought, morality is derived from a superior being, God. If you ask why a person ought to do this and not that, their answer is, because such is the command of God. That's the biblical approach. God gave us 10 commandments. We have to follow them. That's why. Why should I be moral? Because God said so. I'm a child of God. God said I should do this and not that. Okay. So that's why I have to do it. But the commandments also basically lead to the same thing. They emphasize what? Unselfishness. Whatever be the source from which it is derived, their code of ethics also has this same central idea: not to think of self, but to give up self. Interesting. And now he's going to come back again to this idea of fear. Yet some persons, in spite of this high ethical idea, are frightened at the thought of having to give up their little personalities. We may ask the person who clings to the idea of little personalities to consider the case of a person who has become perfectly unselfish, who has no thought for him or herself, who does no deed for him or herself, who speaks no word for him or herself, and then say where this himself, where this herself is. This fear, I think we all have it to a certain extent, this fear of dissolution, as it were. If I realize my oneness with all, then where am I? Will I just dissolve? Is that a kind of death? It sounds a little bit like a death, because me, I feel that I am me, the person who was born in whatever year and had all those experiences. What about all of that? So we can acknowledge somewhere there is a little feeling of discomfort that, well, if I realize I'm the infinite, then where am I? What about me? That shows that we're still attached to our little individuality and haven't yet fully embraced the ideal of true attainment of freedom. So we work on it little by little. We whittle away at that, and that fear begins to diminish. And here he gives a suggestion. Let us consider someone who is perfectly unselfish, who has no thought for herself, who does no deed for herself, who speaks no word for herself. Someone we would immediately say, saint. Someone at whose feet we would like to bow. Someone whose blessing we would crave to receive. Can we say, where is the herself of this person? Where is the himself of this person? He puts it this way, that himself, in quotes, that himself is known to him only so long as he thinks, acts, or speaks for himself. If he is only conscious of others, of the universe, and of the all, where is this himself? It is gone forever. So this beautiful idea, this myself, it becomes universal. And myself is in all beings. And so we attain that perfect unselfishness. Karma Yoga, therefore, is a system of ethics and religion intended to attain freedom through unselfishness and by good works. We'll remind ourselves that this is kind of a summary of Karma Yoga because it's the last class. Though he gave 4 advanced classes in the mornings and the 4 beginners classes in the evening, this is the last of the class for beginners, and it's the very last class in the series that he's giving, so he's kind of summing the whole thing up. The Karma Yogin need not believe in any doctrine whatever. She may not believe even in God, may not ask what her soul is, nor think of any metaphysical speculation. She has got her own special aim of realizing selflessness, and she has to work it out herself. Every moment of this Karma Yogin's life must be realization, because he or she has to solve by mere work, without the help of doctrine or theory, the very same problem to which the Jnanin applies reason and inspiration, and the Bhakta, love. All right, here he's interesting because in the beginning, recall in the beginning, he specifically said, we don't draw these hard and fast lines between the different yogas. They are all complement each other. And yet here he's saying that Karma Yoga, as a discipline in itself, it even stands alone also. Here he's taking it as standing alone, though we've discussed how actually it doesn't stand alone. All the yogas complement each other. But without any doctrine, in a sense, and actually he's going to bring in, at the end of this class, he's going to bring in Buddha as an example, because Buddha, though he did have doctrines, but he didn't teach anything about the divine. He didn't teach about God. He posited no personal God to approach or to worship or to whom to offer any action, as it were. So he's going to give us an example of someone who, simply by the force of unselfishness, attained perfect freedom. Now comes the next question. What is this work? What is this doing good to the world? Can we do good to the world? So this question actually we dealt with in the 3rd class for beginners, which was we help ourselves, not the world, on the previous week, the previous Friday, January 3rd, 1896. Can we do good to the world? And at least this time he gives us a little reassurance. He says, in an absolute sense, no. In a relative sense, yes. So we can do good, but not absolute good. No permanent or everlasting good can be done to the world. If it could be done, the world would not be this world. Really, we think, why do these great teachers come? And why do they have to keep coming? I mean, if a perfected soul, a God manifestation of the divine, like Sri Ramakrishna or Jesus or Buddha or Ma Sarada, why do they keep coming? If they could solve the problem once and for all. But that's not the nature of the world. The world is such that it's impermanent and imperfect, and in the world which is so marked by impermanence, we cannot do anything permanent. We cannot do a permanent thing of good, nor can we do something that's permanently bad. So we may satisfy the hunger of a person for 5 minutes, but that person will be hungry again. Every pleasure with which we supply a person may be seen to be momentary. No one can permanently cure this ever-recurring fever of pleasure and pain. Can any permanent happiness be given to the world? In the ocean, we cannot raise a wave without causing a hollow somewhere else. The sum total of the good things in the world has been the same throughout in its relation to humanity's need and greed. It cannot be increased or decreased. Wow. Pretty strong stuff. And it's good to remind ourselves, because we think the way I at least think oftentimes, couldn't we make it perfect? Couldn't we, if we just elect the right leaders, and if everyone could just be a little more unselfish, and if all the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses could just become a little unselfish and share their wealth a little more, and then everybody would be happy, everyone would have enough. And yet, look at it. Look at the world, it's a mess. Oh my God. So much selfishness, so much greed. And so many people without enough to eat. So Swamiji says, well, that's the world. So what is our call? Unselfishness. Work for freedom. Feel the suffering of others and try to alleviate it, and thereby make yourself more unselfish, and step by step move towards the infinite unselfishness, and then attain true freedom and true perfection. That's the perfection which is possible. It is possible to attain perfection, but it's not perfection externally in this physical world. It's not perfection in society. It's spiritual perfection, which is our goal. And the only cure for the ills of this world really is to attain this unselfishness, to attain freedom, and then to see the divine shining in every heart, to see that it is, as it were, perfect in its imperfection. Why? Because it is simply a manifestation of the divine. And even the sufferings, the starving and suffering are also the divine. They're also God. And then we want to serve, of course. That's why Swami Vivekananda worked so hard. So it's probably a good place to stop. End of a paragraph. He's going to go on and describe how see in this world how there's so much suffer, and the same if we look back over history, the same cycle of pleasure and pain, and how we cannot. He's going to go into this for several pages, in fact. And even the idea of equality is impossible. We're not born with the same physical power, mental power, spiritual power. And finally, he'll close. It'll take a couple more at least one more session, or if not two. And he closes with a session on Buddha. So are there any comments or questions? Yes, Andrew.
So there are lots of people in the world doing karma yoga, but they don't call it karma yoga. They're just very unselfish people.
Uh-huh.
That go back to work for them. Are they also achieving liberation and going towards total freedom?
Of course, there are.
They don't believe in God and think all that's nonsense.
Well, it may be nonsense for them. And for you. Well, to do truly unselfish work really is very, very difficult. But certainly there are many. Yes, Swami Vivekananda, I think, would say absolutely. He doesn't care for doctrines, and in fact, here he's saying this karma yoga. There's no doctrine involved. Just through the power of unselfish action, you're attaining freedom. You're attaining that freedom from the true bondage, which is the bondage of selfishness. So wherever we see unselfish action, we can say, yes, this is leading Godward. This person is untying some of the knots that bind her down to this world. The the real difficulty, the challenge is that we don't call karma yoga what is simply karma when we get attached to it. Because there are also, I'm thinking of a particular advocate for the homeless in Washington, D.C., when I was staying there for some time, who was in the newspapers all the time and really strongly advocating for homeless. But I met someone who knew him personally, who said he's the most egotistical person, and a huge ego that I'm the savior of homeless people and whatever. And tragically, he ended up killing himself. He ended up committing suicide because it was not genuine unselfishness. It was a huge maelstrom of egotism and I don't know. So.
Yeah, it's difficult having a guide without having a guide.
Mm-hmm. But it's a beautiful ideal. Unselfishness. In another place, Swami Vivekananda says, unselfishness is God. Any other comments or questions? Anything online?
There is. It's not related to karma yoga.
Not related to karma yoga. Well, let's leave it. Let the questions be on karma yoga. We've come to the end of our hour. Let's just, as we usually do, take just a minute to reflect on what we've studied. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityurma mritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From death, lead us to immortality. Om peace, peace, peace. While our,
One question related to karma yoga.
okay, but just what occurred to me during my little reflection, which you maybe also had something, occurred to me that we do some unselfish act, and then we want to be noticed for it, right? We do something unselfish, something maybe we help, and then we hope that somebody notices that other people should know how unselfish I am, and then it's no longer unselfish, and then we tie those knots again. Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, in the 12-step program, we have a thing where a guide to you in spiritual affairs, you do 2 good things for other people just for exercise, but if anybody else knows about it, it doesn't count.
In the 12, which step is that?
It's just a general.
Oh, a general thing in the 12 steps that you should do 2 things every day, as it were. 2 things, do 2 good turns to anybody else. But if anybody else knows about it, then it doesn't count.
That's right.
Okay, very good. I like that. Yeah, what's the question?
So, how does one measure unselfishness?
Right. Well, I think Swamiji is pointing that out because it's so different depending on the circumstances and on the individual. I think we have to know for ourselves: are we being unselfish? It's very difficult to measure, to judge someone else's actions and say, "Oh, he's unselfish." We feel certain people are more unselfish. But then there can be the case of someone who is doing a lot of unselfish actions, but is getting a lot of recognition for that. And how do they handle that? Watch them and see how they handle that. Do their heads swell up, or do they remain humble, or do they have genuinely unselfish people tend to have a self-deprecating humor. If you start praising them for their unselfishness, they'll deflect it with humor and that kind of thing. So somehow deflect it rather than start to swell up and shine, as it were.
I wonder that word that you just mentioned, humble, that humility. That let's say there's karma and there's karma. Let's say that there's acting unselfishly. But there's also just humanely unselfishly. And then there's perfectly. I think a few times that word perfectly came out with Swamiji. And he can go to those types of places and concepts. I think, maybe, I wonder, that idea of unselfishness, if that's a spiritual gift that's done in a spiritual, almost for no reason. For no reason. We're not doing it for good. We're not doing it for bad. We know you're going to be hungry tonight, but here's a burrito this morning, and doing the best that I can, and you're doing the best that you can by holding out your hand and asking for help. And all of this is kind of, it's in a realm, it's in the world, but it almost seems like it's not in the world. I'm not making much sense.
Well, it sounds poetic, and I think you're trying to express something of the being unselfish without being conscious of being unselfish, just acting in a humane way and just feeling for others and doing whatever's before you. If there's a need before you, you address it and don't say anything about it or call any attention to it. It's beautiful. How to live Vedanta in daily life.
I think that it's probably very difficult, but I see people, and maybe you see people, that they get pretty far along that.
Mm-hmm.
They really are fairly unselfish.
Yeah.
I can't judge them. And the idea that we can judge something like quantify and qualify, it almost doesn't work in how we can judge it. It's a little bit maybe in a different realm than that. A little bit can be
Yeah.
for one person an immense amount.
Yeah.
And conversely, the other side.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Thank you for sharing that.
In this place called America, we were built by the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and these philanthropists, and they were all saying, "Look at me, I did this, and God bless them for it. Here came our symphonies and our ballets and our art museums, our universities." The whole thing was built by unselfishness. True, they stole the money.
Thanks, Ted.
It's so nice that they write books about them and let us know about them.
Well, I thank all of you for coming and giving me a chance to share in this reading of Swami Vivekananda and this study of his beautiful teachings on karma yoga. So, thank you.